Montana Territory, 1887. Nora Callum had 3 hours left. She'd counted them from the moment Harlan Voss appeared at her door that morning, the second morning in a row, and told her, with the measured calm of a man who does not like repeating himself, that the sum was $14. If it wasn't sitting on his desk before the sun touched the western ridge, he'd walk into the county office at first light. Once that machinery started turning, legal fees would be stacked onto the debt like stones onto a grave. He would not call off the sale. $14. She had $4.40. $4.40, after she'd sold the last of her autumn preserves that very morning. After the embroidery she'd delivered to Mrs. Caldwell on Tuesday. After the 3 shirts she'd finished by lamplight on Wednesday, eyes burning so badly she could barely thread the needle. 440 was not 14. The gap between those two numbers was the distance between keeping everything and losing it. She'd been standing in the yard after Voss turned away, looking at what her father had poured 22 years of his life into. The house, the barn, the half-dozen chickens, the kitchen garden going ragged at the edges because there simply weren't enough hours in a day, and she understood, and with the flat, cold clarity that only comes when every other door has closed, that there was one thing remaining. Hope was in the paddock. The white horse raised his head when she walked over, pressing his nose into her shoulder the way he had since he was 2 years old. That was the year her father had led him home and said, "This one is yours, Nora. He'll look after you because I won't always be able to." Her father had been gone 14 months. Hope had been looking after her ever since. Her father had also taught her to keep the farm ledger before he ever taught her to saddle a horse. He used to say, "More land has been lost to bad arithmetic than to bad weather." She had run the numbers 3 times. They came out the same every time. She stood at the paddock fence with Hope's nose pressed into her shoulder and didn't pretend the figures might shift. They wouldn't. She needed $10 she didn't have, and she owned one thing worth more than $10, and she was going to bring it to the one man she trusted to handle it with care. Her father had told her. In that last month, with the plain practicality of a man who knew he was leaving things unfinished, if the day ever comes that you have to let Hope go, take him to Robert Shaw. He understands horses. He's a fair man. He'll treat the animal right. He'd said it once, clearly. Without repeating it, she had carried those words for 14 months without needing them. She needed them now. She went inside and got her coat. James Callum had left his daughter 2 things: 40 acres on the eastern edge of the valley and a complete set of skills for working them. The land wasn't the richest in the county nor the worst, the kind that rewarded honest effort and punished neglect. It had been enough for one man, one daughter, and a white horse named Hope. It was not enough for one woman alone. This wasn't something Nora had grasped when her father died. It had come to her slowly, across 14 months, the way certain truths arrive, first as a quiet unease, then as arithmetic that refuses to balance. She had tried everything. She could sew a shirt in 3 hours when the light held good, and the women on the larger ranches paid fair wages for skilled needlework. She sold preserves and cured meats at the Cedar Falls market on Saturdays. She made every delivery herself on Hope, which was the only reason delivery was possible at all, and Hope ate feed that cost money she didn't quite have. The debt had started small. In the week following her father's funeral, she'd needed money for property taxes, a feed bill, and barn roof repairs that couldn't survive another winter unaddressed. She'd borrowed $22 from Harlan Voss at terms that had seemed reasonable until she understood them fully. For most of the past year, she had been chipping away at the principle with the patience of someone moving a boulder 1 inch at a time. She had missed a payment in September, when a mare kicked over her sewing basket and she lost 4 days of work to a sprained wrist. She'd missed another last week. This morning, Voss had come himself. She'd listened from the porch, hands still dusted with flour from the bread she'd been making when he knocked. She hadn't argued because there was nothing to argue with. The terms were the terms, and she had signed them. The remaining principal was $8. The payment due, with interest and a penalty for the second late notice, came to $14. When he left, she went back inside and finished the bread. Because the bread needed finishing, she made 12 loaves, stacked them on the kitchen table, stood in the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread warming the air. and the weight of $9.60 pressing on her chest like a boot on wet ground. Then, she went to get her coat, the Shaw Ranch, sat 12 minutes from the Callum property on horseback. 12 minutes that covered, in almost every respect, the distance between two entirely different worlds. 500 acres of the valley's best land. A main house that was solid and larger than strictly necessary. A barn that was the biggest private structure in the county. Cattle moving through the south pasture like a slow, breathing current. Robert Shaw had inherited the operation at 28, 6 years ago. He had built on what he'd received by the straightforward method of working harder than anyone else and asking careful questions of people who knew more than he did. He'd known her father the way good neighbors know each other, shared fence line, shared respect, occasional conversation at the Saturday market. He had watched the Callum property from that respectful distance for 14 months. He hadn't stepped in because James Callum's daughter was plainly capable and plainly proud. And walking uninvited into the life of a capable, proud woman was exactly the kind of thing that ended neighborly relations for good. He had told himself this more than once, on evenings when he'd seen the lamp burning late in the Callum house from the ridge. Nora arrived at the Shaw Ranch gate at 2:30. Robert was in the corral working a young sorrel. Patient, careful work, the kind where the horse had to feel it was being invited rather than commanded. He saw her at the gate, read something in the way she sat in the saddle, straight-backed, the posture of someone managing something, and handed the sorrel's lead to Tom without a word. Tom watched him go. With the expression of a man storing away a detail, Robert took off his hat at the gate. Nora, he said. Robert, she said. She had rehearsed 3 different versions of what she'd planned to say. I need to sell Hope, she said. None of the rehearsed versions had begun like that. He looked at Hope. He looked at her. He said nothing, and which was the correct thing. She needed to get through it, and his silence gave her the space to do so. Harlan Voss is calling the debt before sundown. I'm short $9.60, and I have nothing left to sell except this horse. She held his gaze steadily. My father said if I ever had to let him go, to bring him to you. A pause. He said you'd treat him right. Robert studied the white horse for a long moment. Hope was watching him back with the calm attentiveness of an animal conducting a thorough appraisal. How much do you need? $10, she said. That closes the gap and carries me through the month. She kept her chin level. I know what he's worth. I know $10 is not what he's worth. But it's what I need, and it's what I'm asking. Robert. Shaw stood at his gate on a Monday afternoon and thought about 14 months of a lamp, burning late on Callum Ridge. He thought about a man who had told him once, not as a compliment, but as a statement of plain fact, that his daughter was the most capable person on either side of their shared fence. He put his hat back on. Come inside, he said. We need to talk about something other than a sale. She followed because there was no better option available. He held the door. She sat at the kitchen table. Her legs were more tired than she had admitted during the ride over. He made coffee. She didn't refuse it. While it heated, she looked around the kitchen. The pantry caught her eye immediately. Organized by someone who understood ranching but not provisioning. Bulk supplies in the wrong sequence, no rotation system, flour stored beside the kerosene, which was a fire risk and also simply wrong. She filed it away and looked back at the table. You're short $9.60, he said. Yes. And the remaining principal after today's payment is $8. Monthly installment is $2. Yes. He sat across from her, drank his coffee, went still in the way she recognized from the Saturday market, the particular stillness of a man, calculating something he intends to get right. I'm not looking for charity, she said. I know that, he said. I'm not offering it. He held her gaze. What I am looking for is someone who can run the household operation here. The accounts, the provisions, the scheduling. My housekeeper left in August. I have 5 men and no system for anything that happens inside this building. He glanced toward the pantry, which she had already assessed. The position pays $3 a week. You'd keep your own property. Ride over daily or stay here depending on the week's work. She looked at him. That's a fair wage for that work. It's what the work is worth. If I take it, I cover Voss today from an advance, and I'm clear of the debt in 3 weeks. Yes, he said. I'll advance you $10 against the first wages. You pay Voss, you keep Hope. He can work from here. Better paddock, better feed. He held her gaze. That is a practical arrangement that benefits both parties. She looked at the kitchen. She looked at the pantry. She looked at this man who had known her father, who had watched 14 months of a late lamp from the ridge and had never once come to the door. Why didn't you come before? She said. He looked at his cup. Because you didn't ask, he said. And because your father told me once that you had more pride than good sense. He let that sit a moment. He meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. I respected it, he paused. I respected it too long, maybe. He looked at her directly. I'd rather offer you both a home, he said. The position and the paddock for hope, that is not charity. That is a practical arrangement. She sat in Robert Shaw's kitchen with $4.40 to her name and 2 hours until sundown. She thought about her father, who had said, take him to Robert Shaw, he'll treat the animal right. All right, she said. I'll take the position, he stood up. I'll get the $10. She paid Harlan Voss at 4:15. He received the money with the expression of a man who had been expecting a different outcome. She did not explain where it had come from. She walked back to Hope and pressed her forehead against his and stood there for a moment in the Cedar Falls afternoon light. Then she rode home, made supper, and went to bed. She started at the Shaw Ranch on Wednesday. The household accounts were a wreck, not from carelessness, but from the compounded disorder of a busy man who understood cattle perfectly and had no system for anything that happened inside 4 walls. She spent the first day taking inventory, the second building a system. On Friday afternoon, Tom appeared in the kitchen doorway while she was reorganizing the pantry. The sugar was where I could find it, he said. She looked at him. The sugar was next to the kerosene. I knew where it was. It was also a fire hazard. Tom studied the new location of the sugar. Then he looked at Nora, then at the sugar again. Robert know you moved everything? Robert hired me to manage the house. The pantry is in the house. Tom leaned in the doorway with the expression of a man witnessing something he intends to remember for a long time. You've been here 3 days, he said. The pantry needed attention on day 1, she said. I was being patient. Tom looked at the reorganized shelves. He looked at this woman who had arrived 3 days ago with a white horse and a composed expression, and had proceeded to dismantle and rebuild the entire organizational logic of a kitchen that had been running its own fashion for 6 years. He nodded slowly. Robert's going to notice. Good, she said. Tom went back outside. He found Robert at the south pasture fence and said without preamble, the new housekeeper moved the sugar. Robert looked at him. Is that a problem? Tom thought about it. No, he said. He went back to work. Robert glanced toward the house for a moment. Then he went back to the cattle. That evening, when he came in for supper and couldn't immediately locate the flour, he stood in the kitchen doorway and said nothing, because Nora was at the stove, and the kitchen smelled like fresh bread, and he understood, in the specific way of a man who has been cooking his own meals for 6 years, that this was better. The flour question could wait. She told him about the overpayments on Friday. She had anticipated a reaction. She wasn't sure which kind. He sat at the kitchen table and studied the figures she had laid out. 3 suppliers, 6 months, $1,100, and $40 in overpayments, and with the expression of a man reading something he wishes. He had known sooner and is working hard not to. Show, you found this in 3 days, he said. The filing system had room for improvement. How much room? Considerable room. She looked at the ledger. My father taught me to keep the farm books before he taught me to saddle a horse. He said land was lost more often through bad arithmetic than bad weather. Robert looked at the figures. He looked at her. He said that about you. She looked up. About me specifically? The last time I spoke to your father. Robert picked up the pencil she'd set beside the numbers. Put it back down. About a month before he died, he said... He stopped. Looked at the ledger. He said the Callum farm would survive him because Nora kept better books than he did. He held her gaze. I thought he meant it as comfort. I'm beginning to think he meant it as information. Nora looked at the ledger. She thought about a man who had kept the farm books and the fence line and the horse and the last instruction all in the same careful corner of his mind. I've written to all 3 suppliers, she said. You should have corrections by the end of the month. Robert looked at the figures one final time. $3 a week, he said. Is that still the agreed rate? It's what you offered. It's not enough, he said. For what you're doing here. She held his gaze. We agreed $3. We can renegotiate. Robert, she said. Don't change the terms. He looked at her. I need to know what the terms are, she said. He understood what she meant. That she needed the arrangement to remain what it was until she understood what else it might become. He nodded. $3. As agreed, he went back to the cattle. She went back to the ledger. Tom, who had been working on a harness in the next room and had heard every word, said nothing. He went outside and made a quiet note to himself. Before we continue, most of you listening right now are somewhere in the middle of something. Driving, cooking, folding laundry. Sitting somewhere quiet, letting this story keep you company. That's exactly what Forever on the Frontier is here for. If Nora and Robert are worth your afternoon, leave a like. It means more than you know. And tell me in the comments where you are right now as you listen. I read every single one. Now let's get back, because December is coming to Montana territory, and a decision is about to be made without anyone's permission. December arrived in Montana territory the way it always did, without asking. The lower fence rails vanished under snow. Nora's 12-minute ride stretched to 40 minutes of careful navigation through drifts that Hope worked through with the patience of an animal that has done harder things and remembers it. On the third day of it, Robert mentioned without ceremony that the east bedroom stood empty, and that riding 40 minutes through the dark each way made no practical sense when the work was here. She moved into the east bedroom. She told herself it was practical. She told herself this every morning when she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee before the house stirred, watching the Montana territory dark shift to gray, then to the particular blue of a winter dawn, listening for the creak of the third floorboard in the hallway, which she now knew meant Robert was awake. She knew he took his coffee black. She knew he read at the kitchen table for 20 minutes each morning before heading out, and that on mornings when something was weighing on him, he read the same page twice without noticing. There had been more second reads in December than in November. One evening, she found him in the barn after supper, mending a harness by lamplight. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the object resting on the workbench beside him, a leather-handled tool. Old. The kind that had been repaired several times, used carefully, and repaired again. She recognized the mark stamped into the handle before she recognized anything else. It was her father's mark. That was his, she said. Robert looked at the tool, then at her. He lent it to me 4 years ago. I kept meaning to return it. He turned it over in his hands. After he died, I thought. He stopped. Looked at the lamp. I kept it because it was the last thing he ever lent me. I should have brought it to you. I didn't know how. She stood in the barn doorway in the December cold and looked at a tool she had last seen in her father's hand. She thought about a man who had trusted Robert Shaw enough to lend him something, knowing it would come back. She crossed the barn, took the tool from his hands, looked at it, and handed it back. Keep it, she said. He'd want it used. Robert held the tool. He held her gaze. He talked about you, he said. Often? Every time I saw him, she looked at the lamp. Outside Montana Territory, December was dark and cold and entirely without hurry. She went back inside and didn't look too closely at what she was feeling, which was the specific warmth of a place that had begun, somewhere between November and December, to feel like hers. On the first Monday of January, Nora rode into Cedar Falls to make the monthly payment on the Voss debt. $2 exact, in an envelope she'd prepared the evening before. She placed it on the counter. The clerk looked at it, looked at his ledger, looked at her with the expression of a man whose records don't match what's standing in front of him. Miss Callum, he said. The account has been settled. She looked at him. I beg your pardon? In full. He turned the ledger toward her. January 15th, payment of $8 against the full remaining principal. He pointed to the entry. The account is closed. Nora looked at the line. January 15th. She had been at the Shaw Ranch on January 15th. She'd spent the morning reorganizing the provision schedule and the afternoon on a wagon. Wheels spoke that Tom couldn't quite fix correctly. She looked at the name beside the payment, Robert Shaw. She folded the $2 envelope and slid it back into her pocket. She thanked the clerk. She walked out into the Cedar Falls street and stood on the boardwalk for a moment. Montana territory. January was cold and entirely indifferent to what she was carrying. She thought about a Monday afternoon in November and a man who had said, "That is a practical arrangement that benefits both parties." She thought about $3 a week and don't change the terms. She thought about $1,140 in overpayments and a leather-handled tool on a workbench. She thought about her father talking about her every time he saw Robert. She thought about $8 paid on January 15th without a single word to her. She got on Hope. She rode back to the Shaw Ranch. She did not decide what she was going to say. She decided only that she was going to say it before she found a reason not to. He was at the south fence when she arrived. She rode to where he stood, dismounted, and faced him. He looked at her. He read her face. "You went to the lending office," he said. "Yes." He looked at the fence. "Robert, it was $8," he said. "That is not the point. No, that's not the point." He looked toward the mountains, then back at her. "I should have told you. I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't accept it if I asked first." A pause. "I was right about that, which does not make it right." She was very still. "I was wrong," he said. "Wanting to help you didn't give me the right to decide for you. The $8 can be handled however you choose, repaid through wages, or I can ask Voss to reverse the entry and we settle it another way. You decide. Those are the genuine options and all of them are on the table." She looked at the fence. She looked at Hope, grazing a few yards away with the complete peace of an animal that is found where it belongs. "That," she said, "is the first thing you've said today that sounds like respect." "Yes," he said. "I know. Why? Because when I care about something, I tend to act instead of speak. It's a consistent failing." He held her gaze. "I paid the $8 because I couldn't sit comfortably watching you carry it. Not because I thought you couldn't manage it. You've clearly managed things better than I managed my own accounts for 6 years. Because I didn't want you to have to." He looked at his hands. "That's the honest reason. I should have found a way to be honest about it at the time instead of acting alone." She stood at the fence in the February cold and looked at a man who had paid $8 in silence, offered her 3 genuine options, and admitted a consistent failing without dressing it up. She thought about a house that had started feeling like hers somewhere between November and December. She thought about a tool on a workbench and second reeds and a lamp seen burning late from a ridge. She thought about her father who had said, "Take him to Robert Shaw. He'll treat the animal right." She had thought he meant the horse. "Give me until Sunday," she said. "Not to decide whether I care for you. I already know whether I care for you." She held his gaze. "To decide whether I can trust you with that knowledge." He nodded. "No argument. No persuasion." "Sunday," he said. She mounted Hope and rode home. Behind her, Tom, who had been checking the east section of the fence and had heard most of it, waited until she was out of sight. Then he walked over to Robert. "April," Tom said. Robert looked at him. "What?" "I'm betting April, for the proposal." He went back to work. She came back on Sunday, not with an answer she was still working out. With the answer she had already known and spent 3 days deciding she could trust. He was on the porch when she rode in, which meant he had been watching for her. She noted that. She tied Hope at the post and walked to the porch and sat on the step. He sat beside her. They looked out at the Montana Territory February together. Snow across the lower pastures, mountains standing clear, Hope visible at the post with the patience of an animal that has long since decided where it belongs. "The $8, she said. "I'll repay it through wages. $2 a month until it's settled." "All right," he said. "And you ask me next time?" "Yes, I will." She looked at Hope. "My father knew you," she said. "He trusted you with his tool and his horse and his last instruction." She held Robert's gaze. "I've been trying to understand what he saw that I didn't." A pause. "I think I understand it now. What did he see?" Robert said, "That you solve problems before you explain them, and that you're working on the explaining." She held his gaze. "He also knew I have more pride than good sense, which means I need someone who will be honest with me even when I'd rather not hear it." "You were honest on Friday? That mattered." He looked at Hope. He looked at her. "Nora," he said. "Yes, I'd like to court you. Properly. I know, she said. I'll let you, she almost smiled. He saw it. But Robert, yes. Next time you want to do something for me, she said, ask me first. Yes, he said. I will. They sat on the porch in the February cold. Hope lifted his head from the post, looked at them both, and went back to waiting, because he had known since November how this was going to end. March came to Montana territory with the relief of something long overdue. The snow retreated. The creek ran high and loud. Hope moved through the new green with the enthusiasm of a horse that has been waiting for exactly this since October. Robert courted her the way he did most things, practically and without performance. He brought wildflowers once in March with the slight discomfort of a man who understands that the gesture is correct and is not entirely certain of the execution. She put them in the window above the kitchen sink without a word about it. He tried to tell her the dress she wore on Easter Sunday suited her. That dress suits you, he said. The dress. The color. Just the color. He glanced toward Tom, who was standing near the barn door. Tom immediately found something demanding his attention in the opposite direction. Robert looked back at Nora. The dress suits you, he said again, which was not an improvement, but was honest, and she understood that this was how he operated, and found it considerably more valuable on balance than a man who always had the right words ready. On an April evening, she was at the stove when Robert came in from the south pasture, carrying the particular quality of a man who has made up his mind and is no longer going to wait. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at his hands. He looked at her. I used to think this house was quiet because I preferred it that way, he said. Now I understand it was only waiting for someone whose absence I would feel. She stopped stirring. She turned around. He was looking at her with the same direct eyes that had been honest since November. Nora Callum, he said, will you marry me? It wasn't quite a question. It was the only remaining honest statement. She walked to the table. She sat across from him. She placed her hands on the table. He put his over them. Yes, she said simply, the way she said everything that mattered. They married in June at the Cedar Falls church on a Saturday, with Montana Territory summer spread bright outside, the valley green from snowmelt, the mountains standing clear, and the whole of Cedar Falls in attendance. Tom was in the third row. He had claimed that spot since early morning. It was the row occupied by a man who had a stake in the proceedings and wanted an unobstructed view. Nora wore a dress she had made herself. Cream linen, simple, practical enough to be worn again, because she was still Nora Callum, and Nora Callum did not make things that could only be used once. Robert wore his good shirt. He owned one. He wore it with the slight discomfort of a man who lives in work clothes and is willing to be temporarily uncomfortable for occasions that deserve it. Before the ceremony, in the small room at the back of the church where Nora was waiting, Robert knocked and came in with something in his hand, her father's leather-handled tool, cleaned, oiled, wrapped carefully in a square of cloth. He left it with me, Robert said. It should go back to the Callum property. Nora held it for a moment. She looked at the stamp on the handle. She looked at Robert. She thought about a man who had known this man well enough to lend him something and trust its return, and who had also known him well enough to send his daughter to the gate with a horse and a price and a last instruction that meant more than its words. She handed the tool back. Keep it, she said. Between the two properties, it'll get more use. He held it. He looked at her. He said nothing because there was nothing left to add. After the ceremony, outside in the June afternoon, Tom appeared at Robert's side. April 23rd, Tom said. I won by 7 days. Robert looked at him. You bet April. I bet before May, Tom said. April 23rd is before May. That is technically a win. He held out his hand. Robert looked at it. He reached into his pocket and placed a silver dollar in Tom's palm. Tom received it with the satisfaction of a man who has been right about something since November. You should have bet February, Robert said. I knew February, Tom said. I just wasn't sure you did. He walked away. Robert looked across the churchyard at Nora, who was standing with the Reverend's wife, laughing at something, copper hair loose in the June light, the dress she had sewn herself. the expression of a woman who has arrived exactly where she meant to arrive. He thought about a gate in November, a white horse, a woman who had named a price that wasn't what the horse was worth because it was what she needed. He thought about his father, who had been a fair neighbor to James Callum for 30 years. He thought about a lamp burning late, seen from a ridge, a tool on a workbench. Pages read twice. He walked across the churchyard to his wife. The Callum property did not go to auction. That was Nora's decision, and Robert didn't argue. 40 acres were 40 acres, her father's work and her own 14 months of holding it together. She was not going to surrender, them simply because she had married someone with 500. The properties ran alongside each other the way good neighboring operations do, with the practical cooperation of two people who understood the same land and held separate claims on different parts of it. Hope had the run of both. He took full advantage of this, and on one notable occasion removed Tom's hat from a fence post and was later discovered with it in the south pasture, showing absolutely no remorse. Nora continued managing the Shaw Ranch accounts. By the end of the first year, she was also running the books for 2 neighboring operations. She charged fair wages. She did not undercharge. Robert ran the 500 acres with the same patient attention he had always brought to it, understanding that land returns what you give it, which was also how he understood most everything else. On an evening in the second spring, sitting on the porch in the fading light, Nora looked at Hope grazing in the near pasture and thought about a Monday afternoon in November. 2 hours until sundown, $4.40, a white horse she had ridden 12 minutes to the one man her father had trusted. She thought about $10 that had become an east bedroom, a reorganized pantry, a tool on a workbench, and wildflowers in a kitchen window. She thought about her father, who had left her a property and a horse and one instruction. He had not said, "Robert Shaw will give you a home." He had not said, "Robert Shaw is the man you are going to marry." He had only said, "He'll treat the animal right." She thought about how right her father had been, about the horse, and about everything else. Robert came out with 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside her. He handed her one. She held it. Hope lifted his head from the grass, looked at them both with the calm appraisal of an animal that has known since November exactly where it belongs, and went back to grazing. "Robert," she said. "Yes, my father knew." She said. He looked at Hope. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I think he did." She held her coffee in the Montana Territory spring evening and looked at everything her father had left her. The property, the horse, the last instruction, and the man that instruction had led her to, and thought, he never wasted a word. Not one, it was, without question, exactly right. Nora Callum rode to the Shaw Ranch gate on a Monday afternoon in November with a white horse and a price that wasn't what the horse was worth. She wasn't selling the horse, she was following the last instruction her father ever gave her. Take him to Robert Shaw. He'll treat the animal right. He had. He treated the horse right, the accounts right, and eventually Nora right, and which meant honestly, patiently, and with the understanding that a woman who had managed 40 acres alone for 14 months did not need rescuing. She needed fair terms. She needed the terms to remain what they were until she was ready for them to become something more. She needed someone who would admit a consistent failing, offer 3 genuine options, and ask first next time. That is what love looks like when it is honest. Not rescue. Not deciding for someone because you care about them. Partnership. And a white horse named Hope, who knew before either of them did. May God bless every one of you listening today. Until next time, and keep riding.